So we have Richelle Flanagan on from Ireland, right?
Absolutely, Dublin, Ireland, yeah.
And I live in Dublin, Ohio.
Oh, cool.
So the same.
If this was meant to be.
So,
Amazing.
Richelle, I'm so excited to have you on. For those that don't know what you're doing as a young onset woman with Parkinson's advocate, you're doing so much for women out there. Welcome to The Secret Life of Parkinson's, a podcast created by people living with Parkinson's to help break the stigma of a disease no one likes to talk about. Now, here are your hosts, Jessica Krauser and Brian Baker. So I have a young onset group of women that there's 25 of us, probably similar to how you and your friends started. When you met, I know you'll talk about that, but when you guys met at WPC and it just started growing from there. We did the same thing. Like it just happened via social media. One person reached out to me, and then she knew somebody, and then that person knew somebody, and it just kept growing. So now there's 25 of us, and all we talk about is how different we are as women with Parkinson's compared to men, and how that really needs to be talked about. So if you can just kind of give us a little background and tell us what you're doing to kind of help change that.
Yeah, well, it's I'm delighted to be here with you. I've actually listened to your podcast on a number of occasions, with Brian as well. And yeah, no, it's really a delight to be asked to chat to you about women with Parkinson's. I suppose, it all stemmed from my own diagnosis where I picked it up. I'm a registered dietitian, and I was pregnant, 3 months pregnant, working in my clinic, and a patient came back to see me after a 5-year gap. And I noticed when I went to write on my record card for that patient that my handwriting was a lot smaller than it had been 5 years prior. And I thought that's a bit strange. And so then I tried to make my handwriting bigger and I couldn't. So I thought, okay, that's definitely odd. And of course, did what everybody does, goes on to Dr. Google, and a thing called micrographia, which is the term for small handwriting in Parkinson's, came up. And the only condition that kept on coming up was Parkinson's. I was trying to search for something else, but it kept coming up. And I thought, okay, I need to get this checked out. And the only other symptom I had was I had a sort of an aching arm. I was going to a physio for sort of a muscle pain in my arm. So it wasn't shoulder pain, it's a bit of shoulder involvement. But and then I was at a Bruce Springsteen concert here in Dublin, and waved my hands up in the air, and I noticed I couldn't wave my right hand as well as my left, and I couldn't twiddle the fork, to get spaghetti onto my fork. It wasn't turning. It was really subtle. And I said the thing that sort of really triggered me to ask for a referral to a neurologist is I was skiing. Now, I wasn't actually skiing because I was pregnant, obviously, but I was waiting for my husband and my son to come off the slopes, and I was having a hot chocolate, and my hand wouldn't stop tremoring. And I remember my husband sat down in front of me. I said to him, "Oh, I have this, my hand won't stop tremoring. And God, as long as it's not Parkinson's." And like, boom, I was like, okay, I need to go and get this checked out. And I went to see the neurologist, and he kind of thought, look, I was very young, a healthy pregnancy. I was fit. My symptoms are very mild. So he said, I'm going to put you through a brain scan and a trapped nerve test. And, which I've learned subsequently that many people with young onset and many women are put through. And he said, look, there is a potential possibility of Parkinson's. But he said, I don't think, it's probably unlikely. It's usually older people. But I had to wait until my daughter was born and 7 months breastfed before I could have a DAT scan, which is kind of like a
I had
thing to
that.
confirm if they've any doubts. So, but I kind of suspected. I researched obviously all through my pregnancy and everything, and I thought, so I went back, and it was confirmed as young onset Parkinson's. So it was a bit of a double whammy, very much wanted second child with a diagnosis of Parkinson's. Wasn't quite how
Yeah,
expected to turn out.
was that like hard, like that you're now having to think about and worry, which sounds terrible, but like when you're pregnant, you're very worried about the baby. And now you're having to like think about yourself and worry about that. Like how was that?
I kind of had to just compartmentalize
Yeah.
it, because I just was going to drive myself nuts, thinking about it. I did actually go to the occupational therapist in the hospital at the time
Mm-hmm.
just to kind of get some therapy for the sort of handwriting and sort of stiffness I was having. And I kind of had a bit of a chat with her and sort of said, go on, it's probably Parkinson's, isn't it? And she was like, I'm not allowed to say anything, but between the lines,
Yeah.
she kind of
Yeah.
agreed. So I was sort of mentally, I suppose, to a certain extent, prepared. Um, but actually, my pregnancy was very uneventful. It was a really positive pregnancy. But my handwriting just progressively got worse
Well, how
through
was
the
it?
pregnancy.
How was it after you had the
Sorry,
baby?
yeah.
And
I
like,
was just going to ask the same thing.
yeah, like, what did it
Yeah,
change symptom wise?
you know what, I actually, it's a good question. I have all my record cards, from
Mm-hmm.
over the years of patients, and I've actually taken them out to kind of have a look, and I can see where my handwriting started to go downhill based on my patient record card. So I can
Mm-hmm.
see the change in my handwriting, which was before I was pregnant. Um, but I haven't actually looked at it in terms of after, so I must do that, and I'll
Yeah.
come back and let you know.
Yeah.
Um, but I basically, started on the medication because my neurologist was like, look, the medication's about quality of life. If you're managing the symptoms is not interfering with things, you don't have to start it. But I wanted to keep working,
Yeah.
um, and so my typing was affected, as much as my handwriting. So I went on the medication, but so that just radically, particularly the Cinemet, radically improved my handwriting. Um, but I suppose what happened then in terms of, as a woman with Parkinson's, obviously that was one thing, was having to wait until my daughter was born and breastfed to get a
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis, where I know in the States they can do some skin biopsies, to potentially identify Parkinson's.
I think
I don't
that's
know how
I
to
think
word
that's
it.
pretty new. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it'll be great if things like that were done, because I know actually quite a lot of women, young onset women, who've been diagnosed in and around pregnancy. So
Really.
I definitely think there is something to do with pregnancy triggering. Possibly, that's my own theory.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was diagnosed with celiac disease. I picked that up after my first pregnancy,
Wow.
and then my Parkinson's after my second. And it's said that Parkinson's, potentially is an inflammatory condition, and celiac is inflammatory as well. And, obviously we know that inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's disease or also colitis is linked with a high risk of Parkinson's if you're not on anti-inflammatory medication, but that risk disappears when you go on anti-inflammatory medication. So I definitely have a feeling that for me it was linked between the gut and the brain,
Yeah.
that there was a trigger. And I kind of feel the pregnancy was kind of like the immunological load, because there's a huge stress in a woman's body
Mm-hmm.
during pregnancy, in terms of all the hormonal changes. So then I basically, went back to normal menstruating, and I kind of noticed that my symptoms seemed to get worse the week before my period.
Mm-hmm.
And it was from Kyoto when I went to the World Parkinson Congress, and I met my two now co-founders of the Women's Parkinson's Project, Shri Surpathy and Kat Hill. And we were, having conversations over an app called Marco Polo, which is kind of like a video
Oh
messaging app.
yeah.
So that was brilliant. Like that was a godsend during COVID, So we were able to leave video messages for each other, and you could pick it up and then respond at any time. So, even for your group, it's a really cool thing.
Uh-huh.
So basically we noticed that we were talking about the same thing, that we were having issues around our symptoms. And then we kind of noticed that, in some of the closed Facebook groups, support groups or women, that it was coming up again and again. So we decided to do a survey to ask women, was this common kind of phenomenon? So we did through the PD Avengers,
Mm-hmm.
that I was involved with as well, and Kat was as well, to do a survey around a global survey. So we had about 240 women um, complete that survey. About 60 of those were Spanish speaking country, women from Spanish speaking country. And basically it showed that 80% of women reported the same phenomenon, that they noticed
Wow.
their Parkinson's symptoms worsening across their menstrual cycle. And there's about 74% the week before their period, and about 50% during their period. Notice their symptoms
That's
got
huge.
worse.
So
'Cause-
yeah, so I
Yeah.
remember when I took the survey, because Dr. Sonia Mather was telling me about it, and it was funny because I took it and I was like, I never thought about that. I'm like, I never linked the two. I just always remember like having bad days and good days. And then I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
this week I've been great this week. And then like another week would be like, oh my God, what hell happened to me, you know? And so then
Yeah.
when I did that, I was like, okay, I'm going to document it. And then I started documenting it and figuring it out. It's like, wow, like I have like
Yeah.
really a bad like week and a half almost.
I remember you saying
Yeah.
that coming into the gym. You
Yeah.
would say,
It's like, so only 2
Yeah.
weeks are really,
yeah.
Yeah.
that
And the thing is,
sucks.
we know in terms of research that, women without Parkinson's, in terms of, say, exercise training, that their menstrual cycle does have an impact in terms of, whether they're training the week before the period or during their period. So the hormonal fluctuations can actually impact how well you perform and how well you recover. And it also impacts, we do know that it does things like slows down the bowel, can affect your bowel function, which obviously affects Parkinson's meds absorption. It can affect then how you eat, so a lot of women will sort of crave more sugary, fatty foods, the week before their period. So a lot of the symptoms are, premenstrual symptoms like brain fog, so women again without Parkinson's, before I had Parkinson's, I used to always, you'd get a bit narky, you'd get a bit forgetful, you'd be more
No.
tired, but then you layer Parkinson's on top of that, it just is an extra whammy. And
I
why that
know.
is, I kind of went back to the research, because I did science as a degree and then went retrained as a dietitian in my mid-30s. And I kind of thought, oh, there's something going on here. And actually, when you look at it, your estrogen and your progesterone levels drop the week before your period. And actually, you've estrogen receptors in your brain. So that drop actually affects your and estrogen and dopamine sort of affect each other in the brain. So we don't know whether it actually causes a drop or it affects the estrogen receptors or the dopamine receptors. We don't know if it drops the dopamine somehow. And also we know in terms of other research that was done after we did that survey, because obviously our survey was done on survey monkeys, so it wasn't like a research paper out of it. But actually a group out of Spain did do a sort of a research paper, and they replicated what we showed. And they actually reported that almost 40% of women said that their medication did not work as effectively. And then also, when you mentioned Sonia Mather, a number of us kind of worked with the Michael J. Fox Foundation, Christy Lamonic and Sonia in particular did Trojan work on sort of doing surveys for that the Fox Insight platform. And it showed the same results as us, and also showed that women were reporting that their medications weren't working as well. So we've got quite a lot of sort of retrospective survey data to actually show this. So that was, yeah. And also one of the really shocking things was that 90% of the women, pretty much across all the surveys, reported that the neurologist did not engage around this topic, did not talk about hormones. And we looked at sort of perimenopause, because I know just going through perimenopause and my symptoms are kind of all over the shop. And that's because, again, your hormones are dropping. Unfortunately, you're losing them. So we know that affects the symptoms. I was only talking to a woman today, who's 52. Her symptoms are kind of, she said, they're getting worse. And I was like, so are you, where are you in terms of your menopause? And she's like, oh, I'm kind of erratic. And it's probably I said, when do you start noticing your symptoms getting worse? And she said, oh, probably about 2 years ago, which would be 50. And that's kind of the average age when menopause kind of really kicks in for a lot of women. So the chances are her worsening of symptoms are potentially because her estrogen is dropping off. And the question is, does that have a permanent effect on women's symptoms, getting worse? So Bas Bloom, who's a, big researcher, professor in Holland, his team looked at women's symptoms postmenopausal versus premenopausal, and the women postmenopausal were worse, which would make sense because their estrogen was dropping. But we know there's research through a woman called Lisa Mosconi, who's done huge research on Alzheimer's in women, because 70% of people who have Alzheimer's are women. And again, hormones have a big impact. And menopausal symptoms are very like Parkinson's symptoms. So we kind of think that maybe women are being diagnosed later because basically the menopausal symptoms almost mask
Like what?
the Parkinson symptoms. So in terms of depression, anxiety,
Oh.
night sweats, temperature control, going to the toilet, peeing a lot, brain fog, you know, the list is very long.
There's a lot
And a
with
lot of
pain
them
too,
are very
Really?
joint
like
pain and
non-motor
stuff.
symptoms.
Yeah.
Oh.
Joint pains, yeah, joint pains would be one as well.
So you're saying that
Heart
it's going to
sort
be
of
worse? It's
palpitations,
going to be worse for us?
yeah. So
Oh,
just
fun.
it
Okay.
will
Right.
unfortunately for
Do
a lot of women. So probably in terms of surveys we've done, it's been about 40% of women have reported that their symptoms have gotten
Hey,
worse.
Rochelle, do we have
Uh,
like a do we
yeah.
have a plan forward yet as to how this is going to get better?
Well, yeah, we do actually. Well, I
Good.
suppose this is where research needs to come in. So in
Oh
terms of
God.
the around the menstrual cycle, so we know anecdotally that there are some people, women who are given extra levodopa. So the week before, whatever week they suffer,
Mm-hmm.
they're bumped up in their levodopa to obviously trying to get over that fact that the levodopa is not absorbed or doesn't work as well.
Mm-hmm.
So for some women that works. And then for other women, we know they're put on the oral contraceptive pill without a break. So normally when you have the
Oh.
break, your estrogen drops to allow you to have a bleed. So what they do is they get rid of that break and you're just on the pill
Okay.
nonstop.
So I was going to ask you about that real quick. So I'm on still birth control just purely because I don't like having a period and I'm done with kids obviously, but
Yeah.
I went off of birth control 2 years ago, I think, or a year or two ago, just because I'm like I didn't know if how it was affecting my medication or how it was affecting any symptoms. So both my neurologist and gynecologist were like, just go off for a little bit and see how you feel. And that's when I started tracking things as well because I was actually getting a period, which I realized like how bad that I forgot how bad it sucks. And so I did that for probably like 6 months, and then I told my gynecologist, I'm like, okay, I'm done. Put me back on. There was really no change that I was able to tell like significantly. But again, at that point, I was only 3 years in of my diagnosis, so I'm still pretty like early on.
Yeah.
So I'm back on it now. But so what I have like still like all 4 weeks, but I don't, I just don't bleed. It's supposed to be like a light period based on the kind of prescription I'm on, but I don't at all. Is that like a good thing? Like to your point of like, people might go on birth control to help with some of it, or like, I don't know if that's bad or
Yeah.
good that I'm doing that.
Well, that's what at the moment, to say anecdotally, some neurologists are advising, or
Okay.
gynecologists would advise, is to help with the symptom worsening. What was really interesting was I did a sort of a analysis of all the different contraceptives out there, because obviously there's the pill, but there's also the coil, there's implants, like there's so
Mm-hmm.
many, nowadays in comparison to when I, needed contraceptives, but there wasn't half as many. But interesting enough, they all have different combinations. So some only have estrogen, some have estrogen and progesterone, some have different quantities, so actually it probably depends on what you're on and what the combination is that actually might have an effect. So if you're on a progesterone only one, it possibly isn't going to improve possible symptoms, or so I think it really, we need to know more about which combination of hormones and which ones are actually having the biggest impact on the Parkinson symptoms. So
Okay.
to answer your question, we don't know really, I think, at the moment. So if they put you on a particular oral contraceptive, well, maybe it hasn't got the combination that is enough to help improve the symptoms. I don't know, that has to be found out.
Yeah.
And I said that's kind of why I kind of did have developed the app. The My Moves Matter app came from this whole conversation, because we basically had two webinars. I approached Professor Indu Subramanian, and she was doing webinars with PMD Alliance, and then also Helen Matthews of the Cure Parkinson's Trust. And I kind of approached them and said, look, we've done this survey. It's pretty shocking. Can we do some webinars about it? And we had about 600 women turn up. Like, it
Wow.
was phenomenal numbers between the two webinars. And there were so many things, not just about hormones, but various different things that women were worried about, that we said, okay, we should write a paper up on this. So we wrote a paper. So Sonia was part of it, myself, and Andy Anusturban, a gynecologist. She doesn't practice anymore, but she has Parkinson's, has 4 kids. And then with 3 neurologists, and we wrote a paper on the unmet needs of women with Parkinson's. So
What's the
I would
paper called?
definitely, it's called The Unmet Needs of Women with Parkinson's, and I can send you the paper.
Yeah, it
But I
should
would
be a
definitely,
book.
share that with your women
Yeah.
and get them to read it. And, I've had women say, "Well, the neurologist doesn't believe me." I'm like, print off the paper and bring it in with you,
Yeah.
because they tend to have a different opinion when they see the paper. So then within that paper, we kind of realized that women were being dismissed about this. They weren't really being heard, and that they needed some kind of tool to be able to track, to prove that actually this is happening. And it's sad to think that we have to do that, but so that's kind of where the idea came from. And then I took part in a hackathon in at the end of COVID. I come out of Switzerland, and it was like where I was asked to come as a patient champion with an idea. So I came and said, look, I'd like to develop an app that women can track their Parkinson's symptoms across their menstrual cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of the start of it. And then we launched it in July. But the point of it is we need to have prospective data.
Mm-hmm.
So real world data to prove women. So even though we said in surveys this is happening to us, it's not enough. We have to have real world data prospectively to show that this is happening. So we have now a pilot trial that is open to women in Europe and the US. And we're looking for women of all ages and all hormonal stages. We've expanded it so that we can look at women who are pre-menopausal, who are still menstruating, against women who are pregnant, perimenopause, or postmenopause. So we can see, well, are the symptoms worse?
Mm-hmm.
So that's open and recruiting for women at the moment, because we want to try and generate evidence to be able to maybe get clinical guidelines start to get clinical guidelines around this, and also just as a pilot trial to kind of get the basic data, so then maybe larger funding could be had to have more robust, bigger trials done.
Yeah, because when you say that
you're
you're trying to get people either to listen or whatever, are you talking just neurologists or like organizations in terms of like funding some sort of research to continue, or both?
It's a combination. I think
Okay.
that the primary thing was a couple of things. One is to give women something that they can validate themselves and go, okay, I'm not going mad. This is happening on a regular basis, and I can show it to my neurologist. The second thing is to do the research to get data to help towards maybe having clinical guidelines at the starting of. And then the third thing, yes, is to actually have a kind of proof of concept pilot trial that has results that they see. You could go to the Michael J. Fox Foundation, or you could go to whatever organization, say, we need more research done in this area. So we know that, like, the president of America, had just signed off a call for 12 billion in women's research. So we should be jumping on the bandwagon here and getting funding, and they specifically called out, women who are disproportionately differently treated in a particular condition.
Yep. No, I
What's
saw
happening
that.
to us.
Exactly. No, I think that's really important. And we talked about that within my young onset group of like, I think because we posted, somebody talked about like what you were doing, and then the whole thing with what Biden signed came out, and they're like, we got to get on that. Like, how do we?
Sure.
Oh, huge, like, absolutely. I thought Maria Shriver, I'm such a fan. She's just done so much for Alzheimer's in that area, but like taking it now to another level. I would say Maria Shriver for president if I was American. She did the most amazing speech around the whole thing. I was actually crying because I just thought it was so powerful what they have done. And look, obviously it still has to be passed, but it's had a knock-on effect because they've already launched, some budget for women's, it's crazy when 51% of the population worldwide are women, and we're, not taken into account. Like, the other thing that really bugs me is in terms of women, for example, suffer more dyskinesias because of our body weight and our body composition. We tend to absorb our medication potentially 25% more than men. And I always thought it was strange, like a guy who is like 6 foot and 100 and whatever kilos is given the same 3 doses of, a day. I'm like, going, this just doesn't make sense. So women are suffering from more dyskinesia, and like what's really interesting in the app, we can see in terms of the anonymized data, we actually were looking at the comparison between men and women who are tracking on the app, and we can see a difference in the profile of symptoms that men are tracking to women, and women are much higher in dyskinesia than
Yeah.
men are. But interesting enough, men were showing worsening in terms of balance, hypomimia in terms of lower voice. So like it's kind of reflecting what our unmet needs paper showed, which there are quite distinct patterns that are different between men and women.
Wow.
So like for me, it's not a men bashing thing. It's actually looking at how
Helping.
can we personalize
Yeah.
and potentially there are answers in our hormones that could help men too,
Yeah.
Absolutely. I have a question for you, Richelle. So myself going through perimenopause currently, I'm actually going. It's called the Happy Hormone Cottage, and it's self-pay, which is unfortunate, but they track. So you pee on a stick. It's basically like taking a pregnancy test. But it's over a series of 12 hours, and they check your progesterone, estrogen, all that stuff, and see where you are as far as like hormone wise and stuff. And I'm wondering, now that we're talking about this, I'm wondering if that's something that could be potentially tested and tracked with Parkinson's and the
Yeah.
symptoms, see how they line up.
Yeah. I would 100% would love to do a study with that. And we're actually we applied for a grant with France Parkinson's to do a research study with them, and we won it 200,000 grant. Now we don't get the money, the researchers are going to use the money, but they're going to use the app in the trials, and it's going to be in 4 centers in France, and they're going to recruit 100 women with Parkinson's. And what they're going to do is they're going to do the same thing women are going to track for 4 months, but the women that they identify have worsening of symptoms, they're actually going to treat them. So they're going to either, give them extra levodopa or hormonal therapy, or and actually see does it improve things. So again, we can kind of get some more evidence. But I really wanted to put in, can we do like hormone testing?
Right.
So that we can sort of see, but it was a bridge too far in terms of budget. It's more just in terms of like, you'd have to get the test kits, and then you'd have to have someone doing the analysis, and it's all this extra money. So I suppose I think that would be the next to do another study, would be to actually do it with testing hormones. And on the perimenopause, like the research is very strong that women who have a oophorectomy, so early, or go into, are forced into early menopause, have a much higher risk of Parkinson's, unless they're put on HRT. If they're put on HRT, the risk dissipates. So,
and a lot of women
research
seem to be skeptical about that, the HRT, correct?
Yeah. So, and it's misplaced, because basically the studies that were done way back on HRT, which basically scared the bejesus out
I'm
of a
sorry.
lot of women.
What is that?
It's
HRT, sorry, hormone replacement
replacement.
therapy.
Oh, sorry.
So it's when you go through the menopause, you can actually have hormone replacement therapy to replace the hormones that you naturally lose. So women who basically have a oophorectomy, so basically their ovaries are removed and they're put into an early menopause, because if you've no ovaries, then you're going to be put into menopause. If they don't get HRT, they have a higher risk of developing Parkinson's. But if they're put on HRT, they reduce that risk.
That is so interesting, because we have a couple people in our group that had just what you're saying, and I shouldn't say too much because I don't know for sure, but I know for sure one of them did not go through HRT, and she was diagnosed.
Yeah. So it's actually
so
Lisa Mosconi, as say this woman who's doing a lot of research in Alzheimer's. She actually just had a kind of or an article about this, saying that women who are put through an oophorectomy should be told of the risks associated, because you have actually a higher risk of dementia as well, Alzheimer's, if you have an early menopause. So these are things that have to be discussed and put on the table and with women. And so in terms of some of the research is indicating it possibly could take a HRT within what they call the 10-year critical window of your So once you start going into perimenopause, there's a kind of critical 10-year window. And the research has shown if you take HRT in that 10-year critical window, it reduces your risk of Alzheimer's quite substantially, and potentially Parkinson's too. Um, but also there's some indication that it might slow progression of Parkinson's if you take that HRT. But the research it's very thin on the
Yeah.
ground. But I suppose aside from that, one of the big things in terms of perimenopause is sleep problems. And it's the same in Parkinson's, sleep issues.
Great.
I already have sleep problems.
Yeah. So for me, like when I went, so I just took a choice because the other thing is HRT. So go back to that research that was done way back when. It basically scared people off HRT, but that study was done in women who were over 65.
Oh,
So that's not when you take HRT.
right.
It also used synthetic HRT, which is known to actually increase your risk of dementia. Is a fact, period, that if you take HRT that is synthetic, it increases your risk of dementia. So we know that. But in terms of the HRT that's developed now is natural HRT. So it is not associated with the risk of dementia. But if you take it after the 10 years window, it potentially is. So it's that 10 years is actually a very critical point. So it's almost like, the neurons are kind of amenable to the hormone therapy, but after a certain point, I don't know if it shuts down and it's too late to take the HRT. But in terms of the HRT, it's shown to help bone health. It's shown to reduce cardiovascular risk because women with or without Parkinson's, their cardiovascular risk goes way up. It's the same as men once they're postmenopausal. So taking HRT helps to reduce that increased risk of heart disease, and it improves your bone health, and it also helps in terms of diabetes prevention as well. So there's lots of benefits, for taking HRT, whether you're a woman with Parkinson's or not. And it helps a lot of those symptoms, brain fog, anxiety, depression. Like the amount of women we know that are, put on anti-anxiety or antidepressants around the perimenopause, and actually it doesn't help menopausal symptoms. It can be counterproductive. The treatment for menopause is HRT. Now, but not everyone's going to be suitable. So if you've got a history of breast cancer, you have to be careful. If you have a history of blood clots, but there are different ones that you can take that you'd have to have very specific kind of counseling around that. And it doesn't mean everyone has to take HRT. But back to the sleep thing, progesterone, which is part of HRT, is actually sleep-inducing hormone. So I know myself when I went on progesterone, it was like taking a sleeping tablet. I was like, holy moly, I am gone. It is the best thing for sleep as far as I'm concerned. That's it. That's me personally. But it is just unreal.
Did you have bad sleep? Did you have bad sleep before because of Parkinson's?
I didn't really. I had this, this kind of 4 o'clock in the morning, where everyone's awake at 4 o'clock in the morning. I did have that for, I did ping, no matter what, 4 o'clock in the morning. And then also I was getting hot sweats, obviously, as I was going through the menopause. So that obviously disrupts your sleep as well. But the HRT just got rid of the hot sweats during the night and just knocked me out. It still does it. It's
you still take it?
It's a miracle. I still take it, and I'll take it for those 10 years. I'm probably on it now. See, I'm going to be 55 this year, so I'm probably on it since I was 51, I think. So I'll continue to sort of take it.
How long?
So that's me. I'm not advocating that everyone does that. You have to talk to your own.
We say that all the time. Like, we are not doctors. We're just telling you our stories. When were you diagnosed? How long ago?
So I was diagnosed 7 years ago. You could kind of say, because when I picked it up, but I'd say I've had it definitely when I was in my early 30s. I had a sort of voice problem, croaky voice, and I think and I think potentially before that, I did an awful lot of sport. I did a lot of international hockey, and I was doing lots of training. And interesting enough, I had a lot of sort of illness in my family, and I stopped kind of training, and then I had the pregnancies, and there's a lot of I kind of think I had it a lot longer, and I was doing a lot of sport, and I think that probably my theories had kept it at
Yeah.
bay
Yeah.
until then. And then I went through a lot of IVF to
Mm-hmm.
have my second child, and I definitely think it played into some of the,
Right.
to the hormone. I have a whole theory around that, but
Yeah.
that's a whole other
Another
show.
segment. Well, this was awesome. I'm so interested to see what comes of this, and anything that you need to help push this information out, I am happy to do so. I've already sent, multiple things from you to my women's group. And actually, I think somebody probably sent it to me as well, because we chat all the time over text. So anything that we can do. I mean, we have a lot of women too at the gym. Happy
Yeah.
to,
Well, tell you what would be really great
yeah,
is if you could encourage the women to take part in the study that we're doing. Now, like, it is an ask, it is asking women to track for 4 months their symptoms. So if they're premenopausal, to track their periods over those 4 months and then track their symptoms. But if women who aren't having bleeds can still take part, post at any age can take part, and just to track their symptoms
yeah,
and their medication. So we're assessing the symptoms and medication, and if they're bleeding, any bleeding on the app. Because we need your data. And I know it's a lot, but without us taking part and having
yeah.
that data, so basically the back end data will be given to the researchers in University College Cork, and they will then analyze that for, seeing patterns. And I really need the women to do that, because what we're
How many
noticing
do you
women are
need?
signing up. So we need 200 women. We've 200 women who've signed up to the study. They've done the survey, but we've only got 53 women who are actually tracking the app. And that's actually the most important bit, because that's where we need to see the fluctuations across.
It's kind of
months.
sad. Some people are very, very competitive or reward driven. You should give them like a reward if they get to the end.
That's true.
Well, and actually, that would be great if you can think of. Obviously,
Absolutely.
I funded all of this pretty much through doing grant programs, doing startup programs to build the app. We don't have a hell of a lot of money. Like, I've done this for the last 2 years. We haven't paid ourselves a bean, so we actually can't afford to do, to pay people vouchers, or we just don't have the funds, to be honest. Like, I've begged, borrowed, and stolen and applied for grants left, right, and centre to try and get as far as we have. So I was trying to think, like, I've set up a Facebook group, a support group for the trial. So I was kind of thinking maybe I could do, have guests on, and the women could ask questions. That might be a way of encouraging them. Then another friend said, maybe we could have like a buddy system, to kind of encourage each other to track. And, so I was trying to think of what things I could do as an incentive, so if you have any thoughts, suggestions.
I have one thought, but I need to flush it out. It's just because it's this new individual that reached out to me, and she was sharing that they have, she was thinking about like a retreat, and we've talked about like a Parkinson's retreat, like for women or just for anybody with Parkinson's. But it's like, if you, I guess 200 people is a lot, but like if you can make it to the end or just do something, you can, I don't know,
get into a drawing.
Get into a drawing.
We could do a draw or something. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's an idea. Maybe if I could get different people to donate prizes or to donate
absolutely.
things, we could. Yeah, exactly. That's
let me think about that. That's awesome. But we will definitely talk. I'll make sure that I talk to even my women's group or anybody else who's started the app. I'm not gonna lie, I'm probably one of them. I haven't done what I was supposed to do. But question on for mine, because I don't get my period because I take birth control. Should I still track it as if the week that I would be getting it? Okay.
Because what we in the survey, when you take part in the study, there's a survey at the beginning. It asks you what hormone, what stage you're at, and if you're on. And also within the app, you can, in the medication cabinet, there are all the hormone therapies as well. So we can see then we can see, well, actually, we notice in the data that the women who were on, oral contraceptive pill didn't have as bad fluctuations as the women who didn't. So that's the kind of stuff that we want to be able to see. So, and the other thing in the app,
so do you add
in
it
terms of
daily?
Yeah.
Every day?
Yeah.
Okay.
So so in terms of your meds, once you've kind of put your meds in the cabinet, then there's a reminder that'll remind you. Now, obviously, if you're on the pill, you don't have to remind yourself that you're. Well, I mean, you can if you want to take the pill every day. But if you're on the coil, for example, you're not going to be. You just log that you're on the coil in the medication cabinet. But in terms of symptoms, yes, we're asking people to log them on a daily basis. And also within the symptoms, you can actually log across the day, because as we know, we fluctuate across the day. Some people do, go up and down in terms of their symptoms in line with their medications. So if they're going off, so the app actually can be quite powerful besides the study to actually for you to see an insight of how your medication timing is affecting your fluctuations. So if you're going off, it means that your pill timing is possibly out of sync.
Okay.
So it can kind of give you a lot of, so the app is free, and you can see yourself, you can learn yourself from using it.
I was gonna say, I'm looking at some of the symptoms. I'm like, is that connected? I wouldn't even think about that.
Yeah. And we put menopausal symptoms in there, but we didn't put them under category of menopause, because we didn't want to direct women. We wanted them to select what they are actually genuinely feeling. And then from the data, we can see, oh yeah, actually, they are all menopausal symptoms that they're experiencing. And that is tying in with their symptoms being worse. So that's what we want to start.
We'll definitely do our part.
Yes. Sorry that I wasn't.
I'll make sure she's accountable.
I take all of it.
But that's the thing. Like it's human nature. Tracking is hard. And it's a lot to ask people. I'm very conscious of that. So I'm trying to think what ways I could. We're looking at doing a sort of in-app notifications, so to kind of try and nudge people along. That costs us $5,000 to do. So we're trying to find money to look at seeing how we can cover that to put it in the app to encourage women.
Or just something to encourage them, again, like we're children, give us points, or let there be a leaderboard.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Exactly.
People need incentivized. Yes.
So I'm trying to think, I'm looking at different websites to see how could I do a leaderboard sort of thing so
you could talk to the Team Fox group when they did when they have the MVP event ceremony. They always beforehand they try and get people to interact on the app, and so they do a leaderboard. And the first year I did it, I made sure I won.
Well, that's a good idea. I might reach out to them and ask them. Yeah,
they did it 2 years ago. I don't know if they did it 2 years ago and last year. I'm not sure about this year because I didn't get that app, but yeah.
Cool. And actually, just to say on the Michael J. Fox, we actually did a women's podcast, and Sonia was the moderator, and it's coming out on Mother's Day in the States.
Oh, good.
So,
that's great.
She's awesome.
So it's she's amazing. I could just, she's such a great ray of hope, because she's been living with us. I think she said now it's almost 28 years or something.
Yeah.
And she's phenomenal.
I know.
And she's a great sort of example of, when I did the research around the app, we did focus groups with women with Parkinson's. We did interviews with them. And then we also interviewed 12 neurologists. And I asked each of them, what is the most, what do you think is the difference between people who do well with Parkinson's and people who maybe don't do as well? And they all, without prompting, it was all separate interviews, they all said people who actually take control of their Parkinson's and, do all the things that they're, and Sonia is a great example of that in terms of, taking control of the situation. Look, I know that's not easy for everybody. Some people have a faster progressing Parkinson's or have apathy, and, it's not as easy for them, so I do couch that in that it's not as easy for
individualized
to do that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, I could probably talk to you for a whole nother hour or more.
It's been amazing. So
Brian, I'm so glad you let Melissa sit on here.
Me too.
Yourself, so sorry about that.
I'm sorry if I talk too much.
No, it was literally I'm sitting here like this.
I know. I don't even know how long we've been doing it, but I could listen to you forever.
Yeah, this was very helpful.
A wealth of information.
Thank you for all that you're doing and continuing to do. And like I said, any way that we can help, we'll make sure we talk to the women that we know of and get them to document their information so that we can get these 4 months of data in. So
it's a million. And thanks very much for doing this. And when you publish it, I will share it wide, because it's things like this that help to spread the word.
Absolutely. Okay, well, in our last 30 seconds, I will leave you with this. Like Richelle said, take control of your Parkinson's. That is really important. Everybody has different Parkinson's symptoms. We are not doctors. We are not medical experts. Well, she's a dietitian. But everybody, you have to listen to your own body, talk to your doctors, but use this app, My Moves Matter. Track it for 4 months. Think about 4 months. We have our entire lives. Let's learn some data now so that we can help ourselves in the future. With that, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.